At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in.
Well, good morning. Oh, that was sad. Good morning. Thank you. All right. I know how some of y'all feel about the water in the church. I'm just going to let you know, just so we don't have a repeat of last week. I almost didn't make it through last week. So, coming up on Easter, of course, Easter we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. I was thinking about the cost of Christ. I was thinking about the events leading up, and we've been hitting quite a bit on the events leading up to the crucifixion, the resurrection. I wonder sometimes if we understand exactly what it means to understand what it was that Christ did for us leading up to the resurrection, leading up to the ascension. And I found this, and I wanted to read it. This is by somebody a lot smarter than me. It's Dr. William Edwards. He wrote this in 1986. But it says, even before Jesus was to be scourged for us younger folks, that's the beating that Jesus took. Some of the translations say flogged. Even before Jesus was to be scourged, his physical condition was weak. We can assume that Jesus was in good physical condition up until the night of his arrest. The rigors of his ministry, traveling by foot throughout Palestine, would have precluded any major physical illness or weak general constitution. So he's basically saying Jesus was in great shape. He walked everywhere. During the 12 hours between 9 p.m. Thursday and 9 a.m. Friday, Jesus suffered many things, both physically and in the high-stress challenges that took a toll on him physically. It hits a lot when you realize Friday is Good Friday. And so when you realize that between 9 p.m. Thursday and 9 a.m. Friday, so as I'm getting ready to go to bed Thursday night, a lot of this is taking place. Jesus is in the garden. So right now, the Sunday before, Jesus is basically preparing his disciples. He's spending a lot of time with his disciples. He's talking to them about his death. He's talking to them about things that are going to happen. He's still doing ministry, but he's really trying to prepare these 12 guys for, I'm not going to be here. Wednesday night, I think it's apt. I think it's perfect that we are having this neighborhood communion where we're feeding people, because if you think about it, Wednesday night would be kind of the night. I mean, Wednesday night was, he shared the meal with him. He broke bread with him. And all of these things started to happen. Jesus suffered great emotional stress in the Garden of Gethsemane, as indicated when his sweat became like great drops of blood. Although it's a very rare phenomenon, bloody sweat may occur in highly emotional states or in persons with bleeding disorders. I don't think Jesus had a bleeding disorder. As a result of hemorrhage into the sweat glands, the skin becomes fragile and tender and will begin to bleed. Jesus suffered the emotional stress of abandonment by his disciples. He suffered a severe physical beating at the home of the high priest. Jesus suffered sleepless nights. He suffered being forced to walk more than 2.5 miles, and all of these factors made Jesus especially vulnerable to the effects of scourging. Before Jesus took the cross, he was whipped, scourged, as Pilate had earlier promised. Scourging was a legal preliminary to every Roman execution. Only women and Roman soldiers, except in cases of desertion, were exempt. I didn't know that. I didn't know they beat everybody. It makes the Romans a little more hardcore. I thought this was just something special they did for Christ. But evidently, if you were a criminal before you got hung on the cross, you were beaten. how bad you were beaten depended on how bad they wanted you to live on the cross. The goal of scourging was to weaken the victim to a state just sort of collapse. And as the Roman soldiers repeatedly struck the victim's back with full force, the iron balls attached to the whip would cause deep contusions. The leather thongs and the sheep bones would cut into the skin and the subcutaneous tissue, so basically right underneath your skin. Then as the flogging continued, the lacerations would tear into the underlying skeletal muscle and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Pain and blood loss generally set the stage for circulatory shock. The extent of blood loss may well have determined how long the victim would survive the cross. The severe scourging, with its intense pain and appreciable blood loss, most probably left Jesus in a pre-shock state. Moreover, bleeding sweat had rendered his skin particularly tender. The physical and mental abuse meted out by the Jews and the Romans, as well as the lack of food, water, and sleep, contributed to his generally weakened state. Therefore, even before the actual crucifixion, Jesus' physical condition was most likely in a critical state. I never really thought about that. I never thought about the fact that even before the scourging, he's already been up all night. He's already been bleeding sweat. His skin is already tingling. He's already in this moment where he's hurting. He hasn't eaten. He's tired. And Pilate hands him over to be flogged. And they flog him. And the history kind of dictates that he was flogged to the point that he was unrecognizable as a human being. That as he stood there, he just looked like meat. And if you've seen The Passion, I don't know that The Passion of the Christ does it justice. That's kind of as far as Hollywood could take it. But he stood there, and he's standing before the people, and we talked about this last week, and the people are screaming, "Crucify." And the Jewish leaders are screaming, "Crucify." If you open your Bible to Luke, chapter 23. Luke 23. There's an interesting event that takes place. Luke 23:26. The people scream, "Crucify." Pilate hands Jesus over. He saves Barabbas. By the way, I'm going to post up a deal underneath Anthony Drive's website, underneath our Facebook page. If you get a chance, go listen to it. It's a pastor named Judah Smith, and he talks about how Jesus is loving Barabbas. It is beautiful. Barabbas is handed over to the people. Jesus is condemned to die. And he begins to carry this cross. I was reading about the cross of Christ. Another shameless plug. We'll be at the concert on Friday. If you're not, go to Tabernacle. And I know that's weird to hear a pastor tell you to go to another church. Go to Tabernacle and watch Todd Gray build his cross and do their Good Friday. It is phenomenal. It will bless you like nothing has ever blessed you. But I was reading up on the cross, and I was reading up on the actual facts of the cross. Anybody want to take a guess how heavy the cross was? Anybody know how heavy the actual cross was? Take a stab. 300 pounds. Look at you, mister. I went to college. 300 pounds. That's heavy. Unless you're, 300 pounds, then it's all right. 300 pounds, that's heavy on your back. Okay? That's a lot of weight on your back. You wouldn't carry the entire cross. Okay? So when you see pictures of the beam and the long shaft, you didn't carry it that way. Okay? You couldn't after being beaten. You carried the I-beams. You carried the crossbar, which weighed about 75 pounds. 75 pounds is still a good weight when you've been beaten, okay? Stay up all night tonight, fast all day today, don't eat anything, chase after your kids, let somebody give you a couple of good kicks in the back, and then let them put 75 pounds up on your shoulders and go carry that for about 2 miles. It's not happening. I can't carry, look at me, I can't carry 75 pounds for like across this stage. I'm not going to carry it 2.5 miles. What's interesting was tradition says that the long posts actually leaned up the city wall right outside of the city gates. They had just a collection of these long posts that they used for crucifixions, because Romans didn't play. They crucified people and they would leave them out there. It's kind of like, when you don't want wolves to come in your sheep, you kill a wolf and you hang it on the fence. That was kind of their idea, was if we don't want criminals, we're going to leave them hanging up out there. So they just kept poles sitting out there. And it was interesting when I was reading, and it said that Jesus, more than likely, as he would walk in and out of Jerusalem, had passed the pole that he would hang on. And I was like, that's baffling to me. That as he's walking into Jerusalem to do ministry, and he's walking, and if I believe that Jesus is all-knowing, if I believe that he knows everything, I believe he knew which one was picked out for him. But they thrust this 75-pound, 100-pound I-beam onto Jesus' back, and he begins to walk. And whether it was that he stumbled and fell, or whether that it was just he couldn't physically lift it, we don't know. We don't know a lot about Simon, but what we know is this. Luke chapter 23, verse 26, as the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. Now, who was Simon? Who is Simon? He's either a Jew born in North Africa or a Jew that had fled during the rebellion and was now coming back to Jerusalem for the Passover. See, before the Gospels, before the 33 years of Jesus' life, there was a rebellion. The Jewish people had overthrown, and it's kind of that intertestamental period, the Maccabees, the Maccabean Revolution. They overthrew the Babylonians. And the Jews basically were like, yay, we did it! And a lot of them, when the Romans came in, fled, because the Romans were a bit more severe than the Babylonians. And so a bunch of them dispersed. We don't know. I don't know if he was a traditional Jew. We don't know if he was a follower of Christ. We don't know anything about this man. We know that he was coming in most probably for the Passover. So he was probably coming in to make his sacrifices, and he saw the crowd of people, and he walked up to see what all the fuss was about. And he was plucked out of the group of people. Now, he wasn't pulled. We don't know if it was because he had compassion on Jesus. We don't know if it was because, he was North African, so he was probably one of the few black people in a group of Jewish people. We don't know if that was the case. We don't know why. All we know is the Roman guard grabs Simon, they yank him out, and they go, you're carrying this. You're picking this up for him. And I want you to understand something. He picks it up, 75 pounds, he hoists it up on his shoulder. And if you weren't there for the trial leading up, if you don't know Jesus and you just see this flesh of a man, you're probably thinking, what in the world did you do that warranted them to beat you near to death? I mean, because there's two other criminals carrying their crosses down the exact same hill, and they're not in any near shape that you're in. And if one of them is a thief and one of them is a murderer, I mean, what did you do that was so bad? And you're carrying this cross. And I want you to notice that how he says it. I want you to notice how Luke says it. He says he carried it behind Jesus. He was coming in from the country. They put the cross on him, and they made him carry it behind Jesus. Think about this. Christ is walking. Christ is walking. And he can't physically stand. And every time he falls, Simon's holding the cross, he's holding the I-beam, and he has to stop. And the soldiers are rushing Jesus. Hurry, let's go. We're ready to get you to death. We're not taking our time. Let's go. And Jesus gets up and he walks and he stumbles and he falls. And Simon has to hold this 75 pounds. And he has to stop. Every time Jesus stops, Simon stops. And every time Jesus gets going a little quick, Simon's able to go a little faster, and then Jesus stops and he stops. And that 75 pounds, and it's hanging on him. And Simon is holding the physical weight of the cross of Christ on his shoulders. He's feeling the physical weight of the death of Jesus, and it's laying across his back. And he's carrying this thing for 2.5 miles. The cross was thrust upon him. All of his plans, his schedule, his worries. What am I going to do today? What am I going to go eat? I got to get to the temple and make these sacrifices. That's all gone. Everything he had planned for the day, it's out the window. And mission number 1 is getting this cross to Calvary so that this man can die. Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. Matthew 16, verse 21. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. And it says, from that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. And Peter took him aside, and he began to rebuke him. That's Peter. See, we talked about Thomas last week. This is Peter. Where Thomas is a little sarcastic, Peter just doesn't think. This is Christ. And Christ says, I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to die. And Peter jumps up. Never! This will never happen to you. And Jesus turned and he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. And Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth. Some are standing here. Some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Jesus is speaking and he says, I'm going to die. And Peter jumps up and says, no, you're not. We won't let this happen. And Jesus stops him and he says, get behind me, Satan. That's a hard statement, right? You ever look at your kids? Get behind me, Satan. You know? No, just me? Okay. He looks at his disciple, one of his disciples that he loves. I don't want to say more than the others. I'll say it. He loves him probably more than the others. He's chosen Peter to see things that the other disciples didn't get to see. He's told Peter things that the other disciples, they didn't get to hear. And now he's calling him Satan. I mean, just a few verses before, he looked at Peter and he said, upon this rock, I will build my church. You are Peter. Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, you are the Christ. And he says, man, you are on it. And upon you guys, I'm going to build my church upon the rock. Now, some churches get that wrong and they say upon Peter. The church is not built upon Peter. Any church built on man, that's going to fail. But upon this rock, I will build my church. And he holds Peter close to his bosom. He holds him in like a dear friend. And now just a few sentences later, get behind me, Satan. Because Peter had in mind the things of men. I don't want you to die. I don't want you to be gone. I don't want you to suffer. And while that's admirable, Jesus is looking at him and he's saying, you have no idea what you're saying. Because if I don't suffer, you can't live. If I don't suffer, You will not inherit the things of heaven. You will not inherit eternal life. If I don't suffer, if I don't leave, the Holy Spirit can't come. And you want him to come, Peter, trust me. Because while you love me, you're going to really love him. I'm only supposed to be here for a very short time. It was interesting because I had never really looked at Simon and how he's carrying the physical cross of Christ. And it says that he stood behind Jesus and he's walking behind Jesus. And no doubt he's holding this cross, the 75 pounds, and as Jesus is walking, I mean, if I'm Simon, I'm not going to lie. I'm sitting here and I'm going, hurry up, please. Hurry. Let's, come on. I mean, let's be honest. It probably wasn't a quiet 2.5 mile walk. It's probably Simon going, get up. Get up and walk. This thing is heavy. And I'm wondering if that anywhere in the exchange did Simon say, what did you do that they beat you so bad anyway? And we never have a record of Jesus saying anything to Simon. We have record of Jesus speaking to the daughters of Jerusalem. We have record of what happened at the crucifixion. But somewhere along that walk, I think Simon's heart started to break. But you look at what Christ told us and told his disciples. If anyone would come after me, Peter, I'm going to die. And if anyone will come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Do you know what it means to deny yourself? Have you ever denied yourself anything? And I don't mean like I'm on a diet, so I'm going to deny myself Thin Mints. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about I have to deny myself the Cadillac because it's $60,000 and I can't afford it. To deny yourself, to put yourself last, to put yourself on the bottom so that you can take up the cross of Christ. To not go, this is what I want, and I'm going to make sure what I want happens so that what Christ wants can happen. See, there's a lot of pastors in churches that are doing what they want. And the problem is their churches, they're really successful. When you judge them by the world's standards, they got a lot of people going. And they're huge churches. And a lot of young pastors look at them and go, man, if I could be like that, I would be successful. I'd probably also be a heretic. If I deny myself and I deny what I want and give Christ over to what he wants, give my life over to Christ so that what he wants. And look at what it says. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. But here's what you have to understand, and here's what I didn't understand. We're called to carry the cross of Christ. Christ says, I want you to carry your cross every day. I want you to pick up your cross. But look, it never says, I want you to drag it out and I want you to die on your cross. This hit me so hard over the past few days. I want you to carry your cross, but I never, ever, ever expected you to die on it. Simon, you're going to carry this cross for me, and the weight is going to be excruciating, and the walk is going to be painful, and you're going to get tired. But at the end of it, Simon, you're not going to die. You're going to be loosed from that cross, and you're going to get to walk away, and you're going to be a free man, and I'm going to die that death for you. Y'all are being awfully quiet. I'm going to die that for you. That's what people in the world need to understand. The cross of Christ is not something I look at as an obligation. When I pick up my cross, I don't look at it as the burden, as the weight. I don't look at it as something that I have to carry. I look at it as something that I'm picking up and I'm taking with me. And I'm walking in this journey. And then when it's my time to die, I'm giving it to Jesus. And Jesus is dying that death for me. I'm denying myself so that Christ can live through me. Guys, this is what the Pharisees, they couldn't understand. They couldn't get it. The great commentator, Matthew Henry, he wrote on it. And And I love this. Jesus bears it before us. He bore it for us, and He alone bears it from us. I read that in the commentary, and I was like, that's beautiful. Jesus alone bears it before us. Nobody could walk that walk. They tried to make Simon. Simon couldn't walk the walk that Christ was walking. While Simon is holding the physical weight of the cross, Christ is holding the emotional weight of my sin, of your sin, of all of our sin. And Simon's going, man, this beam is really heavy. Can you not walk faster? And you know, at some point, Jesus wanted to turn around and go, do you not understand what I'm carrying? Do you not understand the weight that I'm carrying? You have to carry a piece of wood. You have to be Isaac and carry the wood for the altar. I have to be Abraham. I have to be the loving father who's bearing the sacrifice for the child. If you don't get that, come on Wednesday nights. In a few weeks you will, because we're walking through Genesis. Do you know what I'm carrying for you? And He carries it to Golgotha. And I can't imagine when they get to Skull Hill, to Calvary, and they throw the beam off of Him. And Simon steps back into the crowd. And all of a sudden, he's watching the things that are going on in the crucifixion. He hears the words of the thief. He hears the words of the priest. He hears the words of the guard who says, we've made a terrible mistake. And Christ has suffered all of this for us. He suffered it for me. He suffered it for each one of you. He suffered it for everybody out there. That if they would just accept it. But see, the problem is the world, they misunderstand the cross of Christ. They look at it as laws and regulation and legalism and voting and all of these crazy things, when the cross of Christ is merely deny yourself and follow me. Love what I love. Love what I love because I loved you. I loved you first. And if there's anything in your life that you love that I don't love, give that up. Deny yourself. If there's anything in your life that is not pleasing to me, let that go. And walk behind me. Walk behind Jesus. It's not always going to be easy. I'm not going to be that preacher that's going to say, give your life to Christ and you're going to get $1 million. Those are your Facebook preachers. You can go like all them things on Facebook and hope that your money shows up. Here's what I am going to tell you. When you follow Jesus Christ, when you walk in His footsteps, and I didn't even plan on saying this, but that's a really good point. You know when they spit on Jesus? I wonder if some of that deflected off and hit Simon as he's carrying the cross. People are swinging to hit Jesus and they're hitting Simon. They're spitting. They're shouting insults. And now Simon's not one who's in the crowd shouting insults. He's one standing in the middle and he's kind of receiving those. See, what happens is when you follow Christ, the world doesn't hate you. They hate Him. They hate Christ. You can tell people you love Jesus, you can tell people you love God, they're okay with that. If I go to the government and say, I preach about God, they're okay, because that's very generic. It's when you say, I'm in love with Jesus Christ. That's where you get sticky. That deflection's going to come back on you. When you walk behind Christ and you start telling people that you serve the true and living God, that you've handed your life over to Christ, the world is going to hate you. Because it hated Him first. He told us. Things are going to be hard for you. You're going to be chastised. You're going to be made fun of. Oh, you're a bigot because you don't like same-sex marriage. Oh. So you don't believe in equality. Oh, so you're one of those people that just thinks that, that if I'm not saved, I'm going to hell. So I'm not good enough for you. You're too good. You're going to hear it all. You're the reason I don't go to church, people like you. You're all hypocrites. You're going to hear it. Guys, we have to follow Christ. We have to walk, and we have to take up that cross, and we have to march behind him. And it's not going to be easy. And there's going to be a weight. But you know what? That weight one day is going to be lifted when you go to die. And Jesus goes, I never told you to die on this cross. I never told you had to hang on it. And you lay down the burdens of carrying your cross every day in this world. And Jesus goes, I got this one. And you're welcomed. You're welcomed into heaven. You're welcomed into eternity. The arms of the Savior, those same hands that have the holes in them, he's going to come out and he's going to go to greet you. I don't know about you, but for about the first couple of 100,000 years, you're not going to see Jesus because he's going to be hanging out with me. We're just going to be embraced. You can have your turn the next 100,000, but for a little while when I get there, me and Jesus are just going to be hanging out. And he's going to love you, and he's going to wipe the tears from your eyes, and you're going to be welcomed home. I believe it. I believe it with all of my heart. If you believe it, share it with somebody. Share it with a world that needs to hear it. They're not going to want to hear it, but share it anyway. Share it. If you've never carried your cross, if you've never given your life over, if you don't know what it is to deny yourself and to give your life over to Christ, come holler at me. Because the American dream is nice, a car in every garage, a chicken in every pot, unless you don't like chicken, whatever, two kids and a dog and a picket fence. That's a beautiful dream. Let me tell you a better dream. A better dream is not being separated from Christ when you die. A better dream is having a relationship with the Father. And it's going to be hard in this life. When you first get going, you're going to go, what did I get myself into? But let me tell you, on the back end of it, it's like nothing you could ever imagine.